drummer going into the Big 12.
Taylor McHargue, ESPN, joins us, former Rights quarterback on 365 Sports. We appreciate, Taylor, your time. It's been a while since we spoke with you and thought it would be a nice time to check in. And what a year it's going to be. There's not as much, although it's there, talk about conferences changing, but conferences do have new blood. The Big 12 has theirs. The ACC has theirs. So does the Big 10 and the SEC. How much do you look forward to them actually being in those conferences rather than talking about them that they will be?
Yeah, well, first off, good to be back with you guys. Look, I think I've already caught myself a couple times in the last week or so where I've mentioned the team and I've gotten the conference wrong. And number one, it's just going to take some getting used to. I think the matchups on a week in, week out basis, it's going to be a ton of fun. And I think about the Big 12. I know losing Texas and OU stings some, but some of the teams they added, I mean, this is going to be so fun having these, especially I think about these late kicks where you have an 8 o'clock or a 9 o'clock central kick and there's an Arizona or an Arizona State or a Utah. And just the entertainment factor, I think it's going to be a ton of fun. And my stance on it from the beginning, not just with the conference realignment, but with the playoff expansion, I think there's going to be more meaningful football in the month of November. And I think just as a fan of the sport, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, Taylor, that was kind of the weirdest argument for me for the people who didn't want it expanded was like, well, it's gonna render a lot of these regular season games meaningless. Like, no, it probably just flips the meaningless month from September to November or, around. Like, where September meant a lot more because that's when your big-time non-conference games are. Now it's November because you're trying to win the conference, and if not, you're trying to finish close to the top of the conference, and you could wind yourself up in that 13th spot if you have a bad November.
No doubt. And the example that I've used the last couple of weeks is let's take Ohio State and Michigan from last season, both undefeated. That game, in my opinion, is still almost as important. It may be a half step down, but even still in this expanded format, that's still incredibly important because one of those teams is now going to the Big Ten championship and on a path to having a bye week. The other team is going to have to play in week one, potentially on the road. And when I say week one of the playoffs, so there's still a lot at stake. And that's for your top teams. Usually by the time you get to November, you're down to realistically in the old format, 7 teams, 8 teams tops that realistically are going to get into the college football playoff. By the time you get to the last month of the season, in this expanded format, not only with the Power 5, but the Group of 5 as well, you're going to have a lot of teams still vying for spots in the college football playoff. And just for the sport as a whole, I'm for it. I'm a huge proponent of it. I know there's people that were against it and honestly wanted to revert back to more of the BCS style where we just pick 2 teams and that's it. But I just, again, as a fan of the sport, so excited for these home playoff games in the month of December. And I think this is going to be really entertaining.
Taylor, we could take a whole hour and just talk about the quarterbacks in the transfer portal and the moves that were made. But I'm sitting there going over the list, and I was thinking about just kind of reeling off the top 5 and finding which one you thought was the most interesting. But then I kept going, and I got to a guy's name that I want to ask you about specifically. What do you think about Blake Shapen being at Mississippi State, playing in that Jeff Lebby offense? You know the struggles that he's had, but the successes that he had a couple years ago. What do you think about that fit for him and just Lebby taking over at Mississippi State, installing that style of his and what they could do in a very crowded SEC?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said the last piece on crowded SEC because
Yeah.
I think Blake is wildly talented. But look, Vegas thinks that this is the second worst team in the SEC. Right? And they got Vandy and then Mississippi State. And I just, with the expansion and adding the teams that they did with Oklahoma and Texas, it's not getting any easier for Mississippi State. So I think it's the fit with Jeff Lebby. I think it's a better opportunity for Blake Shapen. But man, the pieces around him, I think Mississippi State is in a rebuild mode right now. And I think it's going to be a challenging year. I think they're going to be struggling just to make a bowl.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that, the coaching situation and then Shapen in particular, seeing if he can bounce back. But all right, let me just reel off some names here. Cam Ward to Miami, Dylan Gabriel to Oregon, Will Howard to Ohio State, Riley Leonard to Notre Dame, DJ Uiagalelei to Florida State, and the list goes on and on and on. Which of those are maybe one or two that I didn't mention of the quarterback moves? Which ones are the most fascinating to you entering this season?
Well, Cam Ward is always most interesting to me because I, 3 years ago, was doing their playoff games at UIW and I remember thinking, I mean, why is this guy playing? And no offense to the Incarnate Word fans out there, but my God, this is one of the best arms in the entire country. And so his path getting to Miami, his path in the portal and the numbers were being thrown around that he was getting in NIL dollars, I think he is a fascinating story. And I know it stinks for UIW, but in this modern era where you can move around, I mean, he's one of the best examples of advancing your stature and your career from a small 1AA or FCS school, all the way to one of the biggest programs in the country. Also interested in Riley Leonard. I'm curious to see for Notre Dame in this, again, expanded playoff format. He's a guy that I think takes them to a level where it's a tough schedule like it always is for Notre Dame. But I could see them, again, making the college football playoff in the new format. And he's a guy that, with his legs as well, I mean, this is not a pure passer. This is a really dynamic, athletic quarterback, and that's another one that I'll be interested in watching.
What do you think about Cade Klubnik, full year 2 as the starter, full year 2 under Garrett Riley? Much has been made, especially by me, about Dabo Swinney and his refusal to use all the tools at his disposal at building a team, but this is still a pretty darn good athletic quarterback, and he can still recruit, so Clemson's not going like all the way to the back of the pack no matter what happens.
No, they're not. And in fact, I mean, they've got even odds with Florida State for the college football playoff out of the ACC this year. I think it's a 2-team league, and I think Clemson's probably one of them. Clemson's conference schedule, just in terms of the ACC, it's already not the most challenging conference. And I think they got a favorable draw. Now, they do have Georgia in week 1. But again, new format, if you lose in week 1, it's not over. You can go the rest of the season and even have 2 losses, and Clemson likely, they win the ACC with 2 losses, I think they're in. You want to see Cade Klubnik take that next step forward. I mean, he was thrust into a situation with DJ Uyunglele, and then last year, thought he did some nice things. I thought at times, the biggest moments, I thought maybe the ball got away from him a little bit, but curious to see, does he take that next step forward really, not only as a leader, but is he a guy that can take over games? Because I think he's got the capability to, but is that the case? We'll see. I do think if you made me guess today, I think that's probably a playoff team.
Taylor, we may have asked you this before, but it's been a while since we had you on. Did you do any games with DeQuan Finn at Toledo?
No, I did not. But my God, I'm so excited to watch this guy, because anybody that did not watch DeQuan Finn, and I know your listeners will know his story well by this point, but I remember talking about him in the portal when that was announced. He's one of the best players at the quarterback position, probably in the whole country, not just at the Group of 5 level, and an incredible athlete. And what he does with the ball in his hands, I think, is really going to be exciting for Baylor and Baylor fans. And I did not have one of his games, but just watched him from afar and have been a fan for a while.
Taylor, the obligatory, how excited are you for the college football video game question?
I actually told, I forget who it was earlier this week, I have not owned a video game console since I was in college, but I had to brief my wife about a month ago. I was like, look, I'm trying to figure out, I'm going to buy a game console. Number one, I don't know which one I'm going to get, because I don't even know what you get these days. And number two, I don't know where in this house you're going to let me have it, but I'm letting you know now that I'm buying a game console. So I'm pumped for it. I mean, the last time this game came out, I was on it. So it's been a long time.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Was that, I mean, I know now everything's, I mean, it's college sports. Everything's always been about money anyways, but, it very much is now on the forefront, but did it cross your mind back then of like, I should be getting compensated for this? Or were you like, holy cow, this is just awesome that I'm in a video game? Just sort of where was your head at that point? And now being older, looking back on it, like, would you have viewed it any differently if you could?
Well, at Rice, I think we probably had I had a little different perspective than maybe, it wasn't like we were playing at Texas where it was like, I probably should be making a little extra money here. But I did, even the video game back then, I did think, man, maybe we should get some sort of payment on this thing. But no, my memory from that video game was every year that it came out that I was on it at Rice's quarterback, it was like clockwork. The game would come out, and for like a week, it was like middle school and high school boys would tweet at me and be like, I started Dynasty mode, and you suck on this video game, and so I got to restart my season all the time. And I'd be like, guys, number one, why are you doing Dynasty mode with Rice if you're not doing a creative player? Get me out of there and restart this thing.
Oh, that's great.
You could also, back in the day, just make you better. I mean, if you wanted to, like,
or that.
Yeah, I mean, just, oh, good. Guess what? Who runs the option really good now? It's Taylor McHargue. Who knew?
Yeah,
but
juice those stats to 99 across the board. I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah. So I'm in a similar situation. I've also had to negotiate with my wife on this, and we're not to a final resolution, but keep me updated how it goes for you, so I can, we can workshop ideas.
Yeah, I will, absolutely. I'll let you know what my setup ends up being, and we've got a little closet under the stairs that I think it's possible that's where I end
You're
up.
You're gonna just
Harry Potter, yeah.
That's right. It's very likely that's where I end up.
So we have to ask, so what was her initial reaction when you brought that up?
I think she thought I was kidding, but I had to sell it as number one, I want to play the game, but number two, it's good prep. Whatever game I have that week, I'll tee that up, and that didn't help my argument that much, but we'll see.
Yeah. When you look at the Southeastern Conference and who they have at quarterback, with obviously Beck and Ewers and Milroe, and there's others, of course, that are highlighted names, is there somebody in that conference? We brought up Chapin and Mississippi State, but they got a long way to go. Is there somebody else in that conference that you're intrigued by as a quarterback?
You know what I'm intrigued by is what happens. The University of Texas schedule, if you haven't looked at it, I mean, you've got Michigan on the schedule, you've got Oklahoma, A&M, Georgia. I mean, they're down weeks, or Florida and Mississippi State. So, I mean, this is as challenging a schedule as Texas has maybe ever had. It's been a long time. I'm really curious if in the early part of the season, if there's either an injury to Quinn Ewers or there's any turbulence, how do they handle Arch Manning? Because they were able to skirt around it last year. There was no controversy. But for a guy that took you to the college football playoff, there is enough there behind the scenes, and certainly with the backup that they have in Arch Manning, if there's any turbulence, or if Arch has to come in off an injury to Quinn Ewers and plays well, that's just something that you always try to get your quarterback through the season. But in a potentially 15-game season, if anything goes wrong or anything happens, I think that has the making in Texas' first year in the SEC to just be something to keep an eye on.
Do you think that our national championship game we got last year of Washington, Michigan, is potential for two teams that may not even get close to making the playoff, given how much they both have changed roster-wise this year?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Michigan, I forget what the percentage was, but I think it was less than 40% of their production as a team is back this year. New head coach. I mean, you're effectively starting from scratch there. And Washington, same thing. I mean, you look at the production and obviously head coach as well, and Kalen DeBoer. I mean, it's a completely different roster for both of these teams. And, oh, by the way, for Washington especially, new conference. I think the pendulum in the Big Ten swings back in the direction of Ohio State. I think that may be the best team in the country. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that may end up being two teams that not only are they not in the college football playoff, but, they're hovering somewhere just above 500, both of them.
Taylor, where was the toughest place you ever played? I know you saw that list. I brought up the video game, had fun with that earlier. I saw you make a comment on your Twitter about Kyle Field, which was number one in that list. Granted, it's for a video game, but it makes for especially interesting fodder this time of year. So what would you say about, I guess, your thoughts on that, but the toughest place you walked into?
Yeah, I mean, Kyle Field was the toughest place we played, and it was when Johnny was suspended, and it was, they were just loud most of the whole game. We were beating them for a while in the first half, and that upset them for a little bit. But when they came back and Johnny came into the game, just volume nonstop. It was unbelievable. And the point that I made on Twitter and that I stand by is when you look at the Aggies and when you look at Kyle Field across the board, it doesn't matter really who they play. they bring that intensity every week because it just is ingrained in the culture, and that's what they do. They make a ton of noise, and they stay for the whole game. There are individual examples. If you go to Death Valley for LSU for a night game against an SEC team, that may be the best atmosphere in the entire country. But in my opinion, I don't think there's that same intensity if they're playing at 11 a.m. and maybe it's a team they know that they're going to roll. Same thing for the Penn State whiteout game. Unbelievable atmosphere. Are they bringing the same intensity for a noon kick versus Indiana? Probably not. And so I think that's where I had no argument with A&M at 1, because week in and week out, it's just an incredible level of intensity.
Yeah, I made the comment when that came out. I was like, well, wait a minute. Have they been winning enough to have the – but you bring that up. But they have been 20-5, I think, since COVID at home. That's pretty darn good, especially in the conference that they play. So the broadcast that you have, and you mentioned using the game maybe to help you study. When are you already starting to like scout who you have, or do you even know what games you have yet?
I am. My situation is a little different this year. I switched over and just signed a contract with CBS Sports, so they're the only group that they announce their full schedule in the summer months. And so I actually know almost all of my schedule with CBS now. And so it's a lot of Mountain West and some of the midweek stuff with Conference USA. And so, yeah, I'm going back in and was reading, and I got my Phil Steele magazine like everybody else, and reading up on Air last night because it's just a team that I don't know much about. And so you start the summer prep now. I'll doing the media days for the American Conference, get familiar with them over the next couple of weeks. And then by the time, we get to week 1, you really just try to get familiar with that first game and then get into your process for the rest of the season.
Taylor, mentioning you, Kyle Field and A&M, Mike Elko takes over a program. The roster's refreshed. That recruiting class might as well, from a couple years ago, might as well have never existed. It's just a tale they will tell, and people will try to believe it like a unicorn or something down the line. Do you think, though, that by going back to being worker bees maybe more than superstars, that A&M might find a true identity again?
I think from the ethos, so to speak, or the mantra that is A&M feels much more in line with Mike Elko than it did under Jimbo, where it was, we're just going to go spend a ton of cash. That model almost felt like a Miami, right? Where we're just going to go buy the team and we're going to roll and we're going to blow people out. It never really felt like it fit with A&M, and you saw some of that with guys that were coming in, getting their cash, and then they were getting out of town. I think the makeup of the team, I like the fit with Mike Elko. I mean, I think, look, this year there's certainly going to be some challenges, but is that a team that under Mike Elko expect them to see some improvement from what the last couple of years under Jimbo were? Yeah, I do think so. And then, I mean, the last one is how exciting now with all this stuff with baseball. Is that A&M Texas game going to be Friday, or I guess it's now Saturday after Thanksgiving?
Oh, it'll be great. It was going to be great anyway, but now, I mean, it's just
unbelievable,
getting deeper and deeper.
Yeah, what are your thoughts about? What are your thoughts about that? We've had an analyst who from the Austin American-Statesman. We'll have Olin Buchanan, Texags, in a second. Just as a sports fan from afar, your thoughts about what's happened this week?
Man, it's heartbreaking if you're an Aggie fan. My brother's an Aggie, and look, it hurts. That stings about as much as anything. 24 hours, losing a national championship and then losing your entire staff, and now it looks like most of that roster, just about as brutal as it gets. I think it is a reminder for modern college athletics. There's no loyalty really anymore for these players and coaches. Very little. I shouldn't say none, but it matters more. That loyalty matters so much more to the fans than it does in a lot of instances for players and coaches, where they're going to go where the best opportunity is for them. And if that's to your direct rival, that may in fact happen. And that may feel like, you were stabbed in the back, but it's a business to these guys. And again, heartbreaking for the Aggies. But when you trace back the relationship to CDC and their time at TCU, it makes sense on paper. It's just unbelievable how it played out.
Thank you, Taylor. Appreciate it. Enjoy your summer. Good luck with that negotiation on the game and where it locates in your house. And keep us up to date so we can help Paul with his one-sided decision that won't be his. Thanks for your time, buddy. Taylor McHargue with us. Rice University quarterback and now part of CBS Sports Network. We appreciate his time. Now, when we come back,